if you ask me right now what one of my three favorite films of all time, I would say Madame de, the Max O'Fools, Ugetsu, Kenji Mizoguchi, and Jean Renoir's La Règle du Jeu. And each of these films has a quality of cinema which I greatly admire, and that is the cinema, the sense of the moving camera and of keeping everything within the same frame. And that is my basic taste this day in film. And so I'd say everything comes back to Bazin and a great many of his French colleagues. Bresson is not my ultimate director. He's not a director that I feel expresses everything that I feel about cinema, or even a great deal. I find him a little difficult, and I think he leaves out things that are very important. Acting, things like that, you know, which I've become very attached to over the years. I've been watching movies. When I was at the Venice Film Festival some years ago, quite a few years ago actually, years just fly by and so forth. And one of my fellow jurors was Giulio Pontecorvo, who recently died, who was a fascinating figure. He was an Italian, he did Battle of Algiers, and he was an Italian tennis champion when he was much younger. And he was a very charming man, and I played a little tennis with him. He had a wonderful spin on the ball. I played a little tennis with him in New York when he visited New York. But here in Venice, we were sitting one night in the Lido, and Robert Bresson was sitting a few seats away, and we were just watching Bresson. And he said he was at Venice the same year that Bresson had Hasard Balthazar at Venice, and he was there at the same time. And actually, he won the prize, but he thought Balthazar was a better film. And I thought that was a fantastic tribute for one director to pay another, and I've always remembered that. Even then, I couldn't approach him. You know, I didn't know what I could ask him, because there is something ultimately very mysterious about Bresson's style, about Bresson's stubbornness, about his strange rigor that his films have. And he is one of the great filmmakers. He's not my favorite filmmaker, but he's one of the great ones. And that I will argue with anyone.
I do have tremendous admiration for Bresson, and as a narrative filmmaker, and somebody who created his own kind of film language. And Balthazar is my favorite of his, because it's such a strong emotional experience, I think. I mean, the mysterious thing about Bresson is he seems so cerebral. He's such an intellectual filmmaker, but I think that all of his movies ultimately are emotional experiences.
I book it every year or so in my class. So I've seen it many times. When I first saw it, it was very much a revelation. It is much an emotional revelation as a artistic revelation. It's a strange film.
At the beginning, there's that very strange sequence, you know, there's this little paradise at the beginning when they're all children, and the children baptize Balthazar playfully, and I think that means, I mean, I assume that sort of gives Balthazar a soul. They've naively conferred a soul on him, so that he is like the rest of us, but his being is pure. in the movie. It's more existential. I mean, all he can do is suffer.
The whole point of the film is that Balthazar is witnessing the self-damnation of all these creatures, and he just plods on as a mute witness to the follies of mankind. And the characterizations here of the evil boy, you know, who just wears horns, you know, just says I am evil, you know, big sign, and Bazin. The doomed, the self-destructive vagabond. That strange scene where they smashing all the liquor in the establishment. The willfulness of all the characters. The strange, weird seduction scene of the misanthrope, miserly misanthrope. So I don't believe that that's any statement that these very extreme characters in Balthazar make is to be taken at face value. It's not a statement of a director. It's not a statement of life. It's merely part of the human follies that this sainted animal in a state of grace witnesses. And that is the whole point of the film. And cinema makes it possible for us to somehow enter this world of the donkey, of Balthasar, and feel at what he feels.
I do think that Balthazar, that the donkey, gives a great performance.
Yeah. No, that he outacts everyone else.
Andy reviewed it in the Voice. His review was really crucial in getting people to see that movie. And then what happened was it was voted into the Essential Cinema when Anthology Film Archives began. It was one of the movies in the Essential Cinema, and so it was possible to see it, but only because they didn't believe in subtitles. You know, that it destroyed the purity of the experience. I think I said I knew less French than Balthazar, than the donkey, but I think it was great to be able to see it that way anyhow, because it compelled somebody like me to just look at that movie and not worry so much about what was being said. You can figure it all out anyway.
Interestingly, Orson Welles hated Bresson. He said he was in a theater. What?
Antonioni also.
Yeah, and he was in a theater in Paris or someplace, and he had walked into the middle of the picture, and gradually he was hating it so much, and he said, "Oh, I knew it was Bresson. I knew it was." and you can feel the tension that Welles must have felt as this most histrionic of directors, you know, confronting this most anti-histrionic of directors. And that to me is what's fascinating about film, is that you can take these opposites and you can still admire both what they both bring to the table. And but to me, that is sort of a limiting factor in a sense to both Welles and Bresson. Welles is too histrionic, Bresson is too anti-histrionic. I like something closer to the middle for myself. Originally, when I was in Columbia, around 46 to 51 or something, I took a course in creative writing, and I wanted to take a course in creative writing. You had to go to an interview with F.W. Dupee. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of him. He was a very renowned academic, and he said, "Well, you had to tell him what you wanted to write." And I said, "Well, I'd like to write film criticism," because I've been picking up on old film critics from the 30s and 40s, and I was film nut, film enthusiast, and I wanted to write a film, be a film critic. And he said, "Oh no," he said, "you don't want to write film criticism. We've already lost Jim Agee, film criticism. He was a beautiful writer, and we lost him to the movies, and you don't want to do that." And that was the general academic attitude then and much later. I took this one course in the Center of Mass Communication in film, and it was a very good course. It would stand in comparison to any course being given today. I can't remember who was giving it at that time, but one day in the course, and I was always raising my hand, and I always had opinions and all that. And so one day, the person who was giving the course introduced somebody who was just starting a new film magazine, and he said, "This is Jonas Mekas." I never heard of Jonas, no one had ever heard of Jonas Mekas. The story was he was a Lithuanian poet laureate at one time or another or something, and he'd come to the United States for a few years. But this new magazine was called Film Culture, and it was a very glossy magazine. And it had a lot of distinguished backers, including James Agee and other people like that. And somehow Jonas had managed to bring all these people together and support the publication, at least let their names be used to support the publication. And he had a lot of interesting articles from writers abroad, very distinguished filmmakers and writers abroad. So this professor at Columbia recommended me, and there was no money in it. And I said, "Okay, I'll be glad to help you edit the magazine, but in return I'd like to review a movie." And the first movie I reviewed for him at that time was The Country Girl with Bing Crosby. And I wrote a vicious pan of it. It was a Clifford Odets play, and Bing Crosby played the part that Paul Collier played on the stage. And I just tore it apart. That was the beginning of my association with Jonas. And it was the first time my work had appeared in print. I kept doing it, no money, nothing. And for a while I worked for David Oselnik and Darryl F. Zanuck when they had a New York office and so forth. And I even wrote a couple of screenplays and so forth. And so anyway, but I was walking down the street in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and who should I bump into again? And I hadn't seen Jonas for a few years. I contributed articles on and off, but it was very intermittent. And I bumped into him again. He said, "Oh, I'm glad I bumped into you. I'm shooting my film, Guns in the Trees, and I've just started writing a column in some throwaway paper in the village called Village Boys, and so I wonder if you pinch hit for me for a few weeks." And I said, sure. You know, and I'd never heard of the Village Boys, you know, and so one day in August 1960, I walked into the office of the Village Boys. Now, you know, nowadays, if I bumped into A.O. Scott or the Times or somebody on the Times, and they said, I want you to go to the editors, tell them you're filling in for me for a few weeks, so they throw me out the window. But the voice at that time was very loose and easy, and Jerry Talma was the editor then, and his first love was the theater. He invented the off-Broadway theater, more or less, and he had Jonas on. A lot of people wrote angry letters saying, "Why don't you get a real film critic instead of Jonas?" Because he was writing these very personal things, blah, blah. And he didn't know me from Adam, and he hated Psycho. Jerry Talma hated Janet Leigh's Brazier, and he thought it was typical of Hitchcock's plastic attitude toward life, and whatever. So at that time, I'd begun hearing about Cahiers du Cinema, and a friend of mine had gone to Europe and was sending me letters, and we were writing back and forth, and I became aware of Cahiers du Cinema and their line on American cinema. And I wrote this, the first Cahiers du Cinema review of Hitchcock in America. The piece appeared, and they got more angry mail than any piece that ever appeared in the Village Voice, and that made my reputation before it. And so I stayed there for 29 years. And the Village Voice, my column in the Village Voice, made me, really. And I owe it all to Jonas Mekas. So I want to thank him publicly, personally. He's the reason I'm here tonight. He's the reason I'm anywhere tonight. If it weren't for Jonas, I would never be in film at all.
I thought we could maybe talk about the tradition of the Voices film section, just something that, specifically the tradition of advocacy, which is something that I was hoping to capture in this book, and we couldn't do a comprehensive film guide, and so the idea was to construct a book based on films that the Voices critics have championed over the years. And Jim, you actually write about this in the introduction quite a bit, about how just the sheer educational value of reading the Voices film section as a young cineast, and I think a lot of people, I mean, I certainly did, I think a lot of us did, came to the Voice that way. And could you expand on that about reading Sarris and Mekas as a teenager?
They were both extremely strong aesthetic personalities and completely different. It was really kind of astonishing whenever they read. Jonas was a unique critic in that he was a total advocate. He was really a propagandist. He was kind of a blogger, years before that existed. I mean, he would just go out. There were some other people writers at the Voice like that. Just go out and look at movies and write extremely personally about them, and in a way to get you to interested in things that nobody else really was writing about. And Andy, in my opinion, was the first a critic, at least that I was aware of, who had the whole sense of film history in his head, so that everything he wrote, whatever he reviewed in any given week, he always was able to place in a tremendously broad context, and that was enormously educational. I mean, there really weren't film schools then, and so most people I knew had pretty much memorized the American cinema. And I should also say the most amazing thing is what you had a show on WBAI for a while.
Yeah, 5 years.
Oh, yeah. And I remember I used to listen to this, and you'd be picking up the New York Times, and this is when there still were movies on television, and going down the list of things, 3 in the morning, ride and sell block 11, and just, like, that was very educational. So.
I must say, on the other side of the coin, I have trouble with a lot of people that Jonas has championed over the years. I have trouble with Flaming Creatures. I have trouble with Stan Brakhage. I have trouble with a lot of these people. In fact, I wouldn't presume to review many of them. I limit myself. I mean, I'm not an expert on animation, and certainly not to new forms of anime. I can take it, I can leave it. I'm wedded to that most basic kind of motion picture. One writer, I think, who changed a lot of my attitudes toward film, and a lot of other people's attitudes, although I've never completely agreed with everything that he said, is Andrew Bazin, the French critic. And when I was introduced to Andrew Bazin by late Richard Roud, who was for many years program director for the for the New York Film Festival, and he was accused quite correctly of being a Francophile. He never missed a Godard film. He never thought a Godard film never saw a Godard film that he did not think was worth showing at the New York Film Festival. And for many years, he incurred the enmity of a great many of the most influential critics in New York. But anyway, Rod introduced me to the writings of Andrew Bazin, and Bazin, I think, is a seminal figure in criticism for us, for me, and for a great many other people. The point that he made, and I try to inculcate it in all the students, or try to indicate to them, it's very hard when I talk to students today, try to give them the historical coordinates of all these things, because it's so many years have passed, and so many things are taken for granted today. But one of the great contributions I think Bazin made to our consciousness, and this was a point he made, and I'm sure other people had made it before, but he sort of crystallized all these things into a theory of realism. French is a beautiful language, because the word for lens in French is objectif, the objectif, the camera lens. It was not human. It had no human quality. They were not looking, and no matter how fuzzy the photograph was, or how incomplete it was compared to an illusionist painting, which captures the color of people's faces and everything. The black and white daguerreotype was an imprint of reality. This person in this photo is saying, I was here on this earth, I existed once upon a time. It's that existential statement every picture makes. And consequently, we began looking at films in an entirely different way. The earliest films are now infinitely precious, because you see these people walking out of this factory, you see the train coming, you see all these things. And it used to be the prevailing montage line, the influence of the Russian theoreticians, was that films were nothing until you did something to them to make them conform to a reconstructed reality. And Bazin said, no, that's not true. And he said the earliest films, they have the same power to incite us as the most sophisticated montage classics of the Russian cinema. Now, he overstated the point, but by making the point at all, that had the most profound influence. Film somehow is the story, is this everyone's story. It's so vivid, so lifelike. From the first film I ever saw, I felt this alternate universe to which I was attracted. I think, basically, when people say they're religious, and this comes up with Bresson and everything else, or say, and with Bergman, whether he's religious or anti-religious, the question is, people say, I'm sick of him always talking about religion. I think people think of religion, especially these days when there's so much political division on the issue of religion. It's not because I necessarily believe in all this sublime architecture of the other world, but because I think this is what most people say when they say they're religious, to any degree, and that is that I have a late brother, a late father and mother, who I have not given up hope of communicating with again, of talking with it, and all my writing is basically an unfinished conversation I have. And Arthur Miller said that one time, that all writing is a form of communication with one's dead parent. We keep that hope that there's some way we can somehow explain ourselves, continue to explain ourselves to these people. So in that sense, I would argue for the spirituality, religiosity of the Bresson film, but not in any doctrinal sense or any particular set of beliefs.